North Atlantic, April 1943. The ocean was black as oil and twice as cold. Wave tops broke white in the darkness, and somewhere beneath that heaving surface, death was circling. Aboard the destroyer escort USS Eldridge, Petty Officer Second Class Vincent Vinny Deluca sat hunched in front of a radar scope in a compartment barely larger than a closet, watching green blips pulse across the screen like heartbeats. The convoy stretched behind them, 47 merchant ships carrying fuel, ammunition, and food to Britain. Slow, vulnerable, and impossibly precious. The destroyer's sonar operator had reported possible contact an hour ago, but it had faded. Standard procedure said log it and move on. U-boats were ghosts. They appeared and vanished. You couldn't chase every shadow. But Vinny wasn't watching the sonar readout. He was listening to the radar. Most radar operators watch the screen. Vinny listened to the signal return, the audio feed that came through headphones translating electromagnetic echoes into sound pulses, rhythms, patterns. To everyone else, it was noise. To Vinny, it was language. And right now, it was saying something wrong. The signal, returned from a patch of ocean 3 miles northwest, wasn't behaving like open water. It had a texture, a slight variance in the interval between pulses, a fluttering quality that didn't match wave patterns. Vinny had heard it once before, 6 months ago off Iceland, right before a wolf pack surfaced and tore apart a convoy. He'd reported it then. No one had believed him. German U-boats had struck 20 minutes later. This time, Vinny didn't wait for permission. He yanked off his headphones and ran to the bridge. The officer of the deck, Lieutenant Commander Paul Garrison, looked up from the chart table with irritation. "DeLuca, you're supposed to be on station, sir. We have U-boats, multiple contacts. Northwest sector range 15,000 yards. Sonar shows nothing." "I'm not reading sonar, sir. I'm reading radar. Audio return. It's showing mass displacement inconsistent with surface wave action." Garrison stared at him. "You're telling me you can hear submarines on radar?" Vinny met his eyes without flinching. "Yes, sir, I can. And if we don't act in the next 10 minutes, this convoy is going to lose a dozen ships." Garrison could have dismissed him, could have ordered him back to his station, could have followed protocol which said radar couldn't detect submerged submarines. But Paul Garrison had been in the North Atlantic long enough to know that the ocean didn't follow manuals, and he'd seen the wreckage after the Iceland convoy. "All right, DeLuca." He turned to the helm. "Come to heading 320. Flank speed, sound general quarters." As the alarm shrieked through the ship and men scrambled to battle stations, Vinny returned to his radar set and put the headphones back on. The pattern was still there, stronger now, clearer. He closed his eyes and listened to the shape of the ocean. And in those sounds, in the spaces between pulses, he could hear them. 3 U-boats running submerged, positioning for attack. What Vinny Deluca did in the next 40 minutes would not only save convoy HX-237, but would introduce a completely new method of submarine detection, one that didn't rely on sonar, visual contact, or luck, one that relied on something no one had thought possible: the ability to hear what couldn't be seen and to read the ocean, not with eyes or instruments, but with the human mind's pattern recognition turned into a weapon. Vincent Deluca grew up in South Philadelphia, in a neighborhood where every block had 3 churches, 2 bakeries, and 1 bookie. His father, Sal, was a machinist at the Navy Yard. His mother, Angela, sang in the church choir and ran the household with the precision of a drill sergeant. Vinny was the middle child of 5, quieter than his brothers, less social than his sisters. As a kid, he spent hours in the basement while his father worked, listening to the sounds of metal on metal, the rhythm of lathes and presses. He learned to identify tools by sound alone. A drill bit hitting steel sounded different from aluminum. A loose bearing had a particular rattle. A cracked flywheel hummed at the wrong frequency. His father noticed. "You got a good ear, Vincent. Better than good." By the time Vinny was 12, he could diagnose problems in machines without looking at them. The icebox compressor was failing. The neighbor's car had a bent valve. The trolley on Market Street had a wheel bearing about to seize. People thought it was a party trick. Vinny just thought everyone could do it. When the war came, Vinny enlisted in the Navy in early 1942. He was 19, skinny and terrible at marching. But during technical aptitude testing, something caught the examiner's attention. They put Vinny in a room with a dozen different engine recordings playing simultaneously and asked him to identify each one. He got them all right. Then they played mechanical failures, subtle defects, fractional differences in rotational speed. Vinny identified every single one. The examiner made a note: exceptional auditory pattern recognition. They sent him to radar school. At the time, radar was still new, still experimental. Most operators were trained to watch the scope to interpret visual blips, but the equipment also produced an audio signal, a byproduct of the electromagnetic pulse return. Most operators turned it off or ignored it. Vinny found it fascinating. During training, he started listening to the audio feed. While watching the scope, he noticed that different objects produced different sound signatures. Aircraft had a sharp, quick return. Ships had a slower, heavier pulse. Weather produced a scattered, chaotic pattern. But there were other sounds, too. Subtle variations that didn't correspond to anything in the manual. Vinny started keeping a notebook. He'd sketch waveforms, describe audio textures, catalog patterns. His instructors thought he was eccentric but harmless. One of them, Chief Petty Officer Raymond Koss, took an interest. "What are you hearing, Deluca?" Vinny struggled to explain. "It's like every object has a voice, Chief. The radar bounces off it and comes back different. I can hear the shape of things." Koss didn't dismiss it. He'd been in the Navy 22 years and had learned that the best technicians weren't the ones who followed the book. They were the ones who understood the equipment in ways the book couldn't teach. "Keep at it," he said. "War's going to need people who can see what others miss or hear it like you do, Deluca." Vinny graduated in the top 5% of his class and was assigned to the USS Eldridge, a new destroyer escort commissioned in late 1942. The Eldridge was small, fast, and built for one purpose: killing submarines. By April 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its peak. German U-boats were sinking Allied ships faster than they could be replaced. Convoys were the lifeline between America and Britain, and every crossing was a gamble. The Eldridge was part of the escort screen for convoy HX-237A collection of 47 merchant vessels carrying critical supplies. The convoy had left New York on April 12th and was now 5 days into the crossing, approaching the most dangerous stretch of ocean, the Black Pit, the mid-Atlantic Gap, where land-based air cover couldn't reach and U-boats haunted with impunity. Vinny had been on radar watch for 6 hours straight. His eyes were dry, his back ached, but his ears were sharp. That's when he first heard it. The audio return from the northwest sector had a quality he'd noticed once before, a slight stuttering in the pulse interval, like something was disturbing the surface water from below. Not enough to create a visual blip, not enough to register on sonar, but enough to change the acoustic signature of the radar return. Vinny pulled out his notebook and compared the pattern to his notes from the Iceland convoy. It matched. He felt his stomach tighten. He remembered what had happened at Iceland. He'd reported anomalous radar audio to the watch officer. The officer had checked the scope, seen nothing, and dismissed it. 20 minutes later, 3 U-boats had surfaced simultaneously and launched torpedoes. 4 ships sank, 200 men dead. Vinny had filed a formal report afterward describing what he'd heard. It was noted and ignored. Radar couldn't detect submarines. Everyone knew that. But Vinny knew what he'd heard, and he was hearing it again. He made a decision. He left his station without authorization and went straight to the bridge. Lieutenant Commander Paul Garrison was 34 years old, Annapolis graduate, career Navy. He was competent by the book and exhausted. Convoy duty was a grinding war of attrition, and Garrison had already lost 2 ships on his previous escort run when Vinny burst onto the bridge. Garrison's first instinct was to reprimand him, but something in the younger man's face stopped him. "Deluca, what is it?" "Sir, I'm detecting anomalous radar returns consistent with submerged mass displacement. Northwest sector, multiple contacts." Garrison frowned. "Sonar has nothing." "I'm not using sonar, sir. I'm reading acoustic variants in radar pulse return. The shape of the signal is wrong. It matches a pattern I documented during the Iceland convoy attack." Garrison knew about Iceland. Everyone did. "Are you telling me you can detect submarines with radar?" "Not visually, sir. Acoustically, the radar pulse hits disturbed water above a submerged hull. The return signal has a different texture. I can hear it. Garrison looked at his executive officer, Lieutenant Harris, who looked skeptical. The sonar operator seated nearby shook his head. Sir, respectfully, that's not possible. Radar waves don't penetrate water. Vinny didn't back down. They don't have to. The sub displaces water. That displacement creates surface turbulence. The radar reflects off that turbulence differently than it does off normal wave action. It's subtle, but it's there. Garrison studied Vinny. 6 months ago, you reported this at Iceland. Yes, sir. And no one believed you? No, sir. And then you boats attacked. Yes, sir. Garrison looked at the clock, at the chart, at the convoy steaming behind them, slow and helpless. He thought about the 200 men who died at Iceland. He thought about the manual that said radar couldn't do what Deluca claimed. And then he thought about the fact that manuals were written by people who'd never been hunted by submarines in the middle of the Atlantic. What's your confidence level, Deluca? Vinny didn't hesitate. 90%, sir. If I'm right, they're positioning for a wolf-pack attack. If I'm wrong, we waste fuel on a wild goose chase. Garrison made his decision. Helm come to heading 320, flank speed, sound general quarters. All hands to battle stations. The alarm wailed. Men ran. The Eldridge surged forward, her engines roaring, bow cutting through the black water toward a target no one else could see. The Eldridge raced northwest at 24 knots, every man aboard, tense and silent. Vinny was back at his radar station, headphones clamped over his ears, eyes closed. He wasn't watching the scope anymore. He was listening. The audio feed was a constant pulse, a rhythmic beep, beep, beep that represented the radar sweeping across the ocean. Most of the returns were uniform, the sound of waves reflecting the signal back in predictable patterns. But in one sector, the patterns stuttered. It was like listening to a heartbeat with an occasional irregular beat, not random, but structured and purposeful. Vinny adjusted the gain, narrowing the focus. The irregularity sharpened. He could hear 3 distinct sources now, 3 points where the ocean surface wasn't behaving the way open waters should. One contact bearing 335, range 14,000 yards, he reported into the intercom. Second contact bearing 342, range 15,500 yards. Third contact bearing 328, range 13,000 yards. On the bridge, Garrison marked the positions on the chart. They formed a triangle, a classic wolf pack formation designed to bracket a convoy and attack from multiple angles simultaneously. Harris, the XO, stared at the plot. If he's right, they're setting up for a coordinated strike. If he's right, Garrison repeated. He picked up the radio handset. All escorts, this is Eldridge. Possible submarine contacts. Northwest sector requests sonar sweep bearing 330 to 350. The other destroyers in the escort screen acknowledged and began active sonar pings. Minutes passed. Then one of them, the USS Brennan, reported contact. Sonar contact bearing 337, range 13,500 yards. Faint, but definite. Garrison felt his chest tighten. Deluca had been right. He keyed the intercom. Deluca, you still have them? Yes, sir. All 3. They're moving, adjusting formation. Garrison didn't waste time and contacted all the pursuit ships in the convoy. All escorts, weapons free. Execute Operation Observant. Designate contacts Wolfpack Alpha. The Eldridge and 2 other destroyer escorts surged forward in a coordinated attack pattern. Depth charges were readied. Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars were armed. The convoy behind them began an emergency turn, zigzagging to spoil the U-boats firing solutions. Vinny stayed glued to his headphones. He could hear the contacts changing, the turbulence shifting as the submarines maneuvered. They know we're coming, he said into the intercom. They're diving deeper, bearing 335. Contact is moving east fast. Garrison relayed the information. The Brennan adjusted course and launched a pattern of depth charges. Seconds later, massive plumes of water erupted from the ocean. The shock waves rolled across the surface. Vinny listened. The audio signature from that bearing had changed. It was chaotic now, scattered. Either they hit it or it's running, he reported. Second contact is surfacing, bearing 342. On the horizon, a dark shape broke through the water. A U-boat. caught in the attack, was attempting to escape on the surface. The Eldridge's 5-inch gun swung toward it and opened fire. The first shell missed. The second hit the conning tower. The third struck the hull. The U-boat listed. Men were scrambling on the deck. Then it slipped beneath the waves, trailing oil and debris. Third contact is diving. Vinny reported bearing 325, moving southwest fast. The third destroyer escort, USS Thomas, raced toward the contact and launched Hedgehog mortars. The mortars arced through the air and splashed into the water in a circular pattern. Moments later, underwater explosions lit the ocean from below. Vinny heard the contact signature disintegrate. "Got him," he said quietly. The bridge erupted in controlled chaos. Garrison barked orders coordinating the search for survivors, ensuring the convoy continued its evasive maneuvers, but he also grabbed the intercom. "Deluca, report to the bridge." Vinny climbed the ladder, his legs shaking from adrenaline. When he stepped onto the bridge, every officer turned to look at him. Garrison walked over, his face unreadable. "Deluca, how did you know?" Vinny swallowed. "I didn't know, sir. I just heard something that didn't fit, and I'd heard it before." Garrison nodded slowly. "You saved this convoy, you know that, right?" Vinny didn't know what to say. "Harris." The XO spoke up. "Sir, with respect, we need to understand what he's doing. If this is repeatable, if other operators can learn it, we could change how we hunt submarines." Garrison looked at Vinny. "Can you teach it?" Vinny thought about it. "I don't know, sir. Maybe it's not just about hearing the sounds. It's about recognizing patterns, understanding what doesn't belong. Some people might have the ear for it, others might not." Garrison made a decision. "We're going to find out. I'm filing a report with Atlantic Fleet Command. You're going to document everything you did tonight, every detail, and then we're going to see if you can train others." Vinny nodded. "Yes, sir." But inside, he felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that he'd been right. Dread that he'd have to convince the Navy that what he could hear was real. The report reached Admiral Royal Ingersoll, Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, within a week. At first, it was met with skepticism. The idea that radar could detect submarines indirectly through acoustic analysis of surface disturbance patterns sounded like science fiction, but the results were undeniable. 3 U-boats engaged, 2 confirmed kills. 1 probable convoy, HX-237, arrived in Liverpool without losing a single ship. Ingersoll ordered an investigation. A team of scientists and engineers from the Navy's Bureau of Ships traveled to Boston, where the Eldridge had put in for resupply, to interview Vinny. They brought oscilloscopes, recording equipment, and notebooks. For 3 days, they put Vinny through tests. They played recorded radar returns and asked him to identify anomalies. They simulated submarine contacts using mathematical models. They challenged him to explain what he was hearing in technical terms. Vinny struggled with the explanations. He didn't have the vocabulary, but he could demonstrate. Every time they played a recording with a submarine signature, he identified it. When they mixed it with false signals, he filtered them out. His accuracy rate was 87%. Dr. Harold Fisk, a physicist from MIT, led the team. At the end of the 3rd day, he sat down with Vinny in the ship's wardroom. "Mr. Deluca, what you're doing shouldn't be possible, but it is. You're detecting hydrodynamic disturbances through reflected electromagnetic radiation. The human ear can't process that data consciously, but your brain is recognizing patterns in the audio feed that correspond to real physical phenomena." Vinny nodded, not entirely following. "Can other people learn it?" Fisk hesitated. "Maybe pattern recognition is partly innate, partly trained. You have an exceptional auditory processing capability, but with the right training protocol, we might be able to teach others to recognize the most obvious signatures. Not everyone will have your sensitivity, but even a partial application of this technique could be valuable." The Navy moved quickly. By June 1943, Vinny was reassigned to the Anti-Submarine Warfare Training Center in Key West, Florida. His job was to work with Fisk's team to develop a training program. They called it Acoustic Radar Analysis, or ARA. It was classified top secret. Over the next 6 months, Vinny trained 43 radar operators in the technique. Some picked it up immediately. Others never heard what Vinny heard. But enough of them showed proficiency that the Navy began deploying ARA-trained operators on destroyer escorts throughout the Atlantic. The results were dramatic. Between July and December 1943, ships with ARA-trained operators detected 27 submarines that sonar had missed. 14 of those contacts resulted in kills or confirmed confirmed damage. The U-boat threat, which had been devastating Allied shipping, began to recede. German submarine commanders reported increased detection rates and started avoiding areas where ARA-equipped ships operated. By early 1944, the technique had been refined and integrated with other anti-submarine technologies. Sonar remained the primary detection method, but ARA provided an additional layer, a way to catch submarines in the gaps. Admiral Ingersoll personally commended Vinny in a letter. Your innovation has saved lives and ships. You have contributed materially to the success of the Atlantic campaign. But Vinny never received a medal. The technique was too classified, too strange to publicize. The Navy worried that if Germany learned how it worked, they'd develop countermeasures. So Vinny's name never appeared in press releases or official histories. He was promoted to Chief Petty Officer and spent the rest of the war training operators. When the war ended, he went home to Philadelphia, returned to the Navy Yard, and worked as a civilian machinist for 30 years. He never talked about what he'd done. In 1976, the Navy declassified portions of the ARA program. A graduate student researching anti-submarine warfare at the Naval War College came across Vinny's name in a footnote. The student, named Patricia Holloway, was fascinated. She tracked Vinny down through Navy personnel records. He was 53 years old and still living in South Philly. He was retired and spent his days fixing neighbors' appliances and listening to Philly's games on the radio. Holloway showed up at his door one Saturday afternoon. Mr. Deluca, I'm writing a thesis on submarine detection methods. I'd like to interview you about acoustic radar analysis. Vinny was reluctant. That was a long time ago, he said. I know, but no one's ever documented it properly. Your technique saved hundreds of lives, probably thousands. People should know. Vinny let her in. They sat in his small living room, surrounded by family photos and the smell of Angela's Sunday gravy simmering on the stove. Over coffee, Vinny told her the story. Holloway recorded every word. When she asked him how he'd known what to listen for, Vinny struggled to explain. It's like when you know someone's in the room, even though you can't see them, or when you can tell a machine's about to fail before it does. You just feel it. But it's not magic, it's patterns. Your brain recognizes something that doesn't fit, and if you pay attention, you can learn to trust it. Could anyone learn it? Some people, not everyone. You need a certain kind of mind, one that doesn't ignore the small things. Holloway asked him if he ever regretted not getting recognition. Vinny shook his head. I didn't do it for recognition, he stated flatly. I did it because people were dying, and I thought I could help. That's enough. Before she left, Holloway asked one final question. What would you say to someone who's facing a problem that everyone says is impossible? Vinny thought for a long time. Then he said, don't let other people's limitations become yours. Just because they can't hear it doesn't mean it's not there. Trust yourself even when no one else does. Vinny Deluca died in 1998 at the age of 75. His obituary in the Philadelphia Inquirer was a mere 4 sentences long. It mentioned his Navy service and his 30 years at the Navy Yard. It didn't mention Convoy HX-237 or the 3 U-boats or the technique that changed submarine warfare. But in a filing cabinet at the Naval War College, there's a folder marked ARA Program 1943 to 1945 inside our training manuals, technical diagrams, and a list of operators who completed the program. Vinny Deluca's name is at the top, and clipped to the front of the folder is a handwritten note from Admiral Ingersoll dated December 1943. Some men see the war, some men fight the war, and some men hear what others miss and save lives. No one will ever count. CPO Deluca is the latter. His contribution cannot be measured in medals, but in the ships that made it home. Years later, when the Navy developed computer-assisted sonar analysis and pattern recognition algorithms for submarine detection, engineers studied the ARA program files. They found that Vinny's instinctive method, the way he listened for patterns and acoustic returns, was essentially the same process their computers were now being programmed to perform. The human brain, it turned out, could do in real time what required millions of calculations for a machine. Vinny had been a biological computer, processing data no one else knew was there. In 2003, the Navy named a research initiative after him, the Deluca Pattern Recognition Program, focused on training personnel to detect threats using unconventional sensory analysis. Most people involved in the program don't know who Deluca was, but a few do. And sometimes, late at night in the sonar rooms of modern destroyers, instructors will tell the story of the radar man who could hear submarines. They'll say he had a gift, but Vinny would have disagreed. It wasn't a gift. It was just paying attention, listening when others only looked, trusting what the world was trying to tell him even when everyone said it was impossible. And sometimes that's all it takes to save lives. Not strength, not firepower, just the willingness to hear what others miss and the courage to act on it when the manual says you're wrong.